I used to think urban legends were just stories you told around a campfire, things meant to spook kids, to make grown-ups laugh nervously over beer while staring into the dark tree line. But last summer changed that for me. I don't laugh at those stories anymore. It started in a little RV park in Arizona, just outside of Holbrook, near the edge of the petrified forest. I was 37, traveling solo in my Class C, the kind of trip you take to reset your life after too many long work weeks and too many nights staring at your ceiling, wondering if this is all there is. I wanted quiet, space, stars, the kind of freedom you only find out there in the desert, where the horizon looks like it could swallow you whole. I checked into the park on a Thursday afternoon. It was nothing fancy. Gravel pads lined with faded white posts, a broken Coke machine near the office, and a small neon sign that buzzed louder than it lit. The woman at the desk, Gail, was friendly but distant, the kind of person who smiles without ever quite meeting your eyes. She slid my paperwork across the counter and said something that stuck with me. "Just don't walk past the fence line at night. You hear anything strange, stay inside." I laughed, thought she was joking. "Coyotes?" I asked. Her face didn't change. "Sure," she said, but it wasn't coyotes she meant. I set up at Site 14, a corner pad near the back fence of the park, where the desert stretched out for miles into low sandstone buttes and dry washes. The sun dipped low, turning everything that red-orange color that feels unreal, like you're standing inside an old Western painting. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. That night, after dinner, I sat outside with my folding chair tilted back, staring at the stars. The desert air had that cool bite to it, the kind that feels clean in your lungs. I could hear the soft hum of the highway maybe a mile away and the occasional chirp of insects. Peaceful. Exactly what I'd wanted, until the knocking started. It was faint at first, 3 quick taps, evenly spaced like knuckles on wood. I looked around expecting to see someone walking their dog or checking their hookups, but the park was quiet. A few lights glowed in distant windows, but no one was moving around. Then it came again. Knock, 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 from the direction of the fence line. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe an RV settling or the wind playing tricks, but as the minutes passed, it came again and again, always in sets of 3. I packed up my chair, trying not to feel ridiculous, and went inside. Locked the door, pulled the blinds, but even through the walls, I swear I heard it one last time before I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, over coffee, I mentioned it to Gail in the office. She gave me that same distant smile and said, "You probably heard the wind knocking something around. Happens sometimes." But as I turned to leave, she added quietly, "Just remember what I said about the fence." I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I stayed up later than I meant to, half watching an old movie, half listening for those knocks. Around 1 a.m., the air got strange, still, heavy, like the desert was holding its breath. That's when I heard it again, louder this time, knock, knock, knock. I froze. It wasn't coming from my rig, it wasn't from another RV, it was right at the fence. Against every instinct I had, I grabbed my flashlight and cracked the door. The night was silent. Too silent. My beam cut across the gravel pads, the chain link fence, the open desert beyond. Nothing moved, no animals, no wind. And then I saw it. A shape, maybe 50 yards out beyond the fence. Too tall to be a coyote, too still to be a person. Just standing there, silhouetted against the pale starlight. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks, that I was tired. But then it tilted its head. Slow. Deliberate, like it knew I was watching. I stumbled back inside, locked the door, pulled every blind shut. Sat there in the dark, heart pounding, waiting for morning. When the sun came up, I told myself I imagined it. I even packed up, ready to leave. But as I rolled past the office, I saw Gail standing outside smoking. She looked at me like she already knew what I'd seen. "You didn't go past the fence, did you?" she asked. "No," I said. "Good." She flicked her cigarette away. "Most folks who do don't come back." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "What's out there?" She didn't answer, just nodded toward the highway. "Safe travels." I should have left. I should have listened to that part of me screaming to drive until I hit daylight. But something in me, call it curiosity, call it stubbornness, made me stay one more night. And that was the night I learned why they tell those stories. It started with the knocking. Again, those 3 deliberate taps. Then a whisper, low, dragging through the still air like someone speaking just out of earshot. My name. I froze. Thought I imagined it. But then it came again, closer this time. Evan. That's my name. My blood turned to ice. I killed the lights, sat there in darkness, straining to listen. The whisper came again. Now, at the edge of my rig, I could hear footsteps on gravel. Slow. Bare. I don't remember unlocking the door. I just remember swinging it open and shining my light out into the night. No one was there. But across the fence, that figure stood closer now, just at the edge of the pale desert sand, its head tilted at the same impossible angle, arms too long, fingers too thin. And then it knocked. 3 taps, right against the metal fence. I stumbled back into the rig, slammed the door, and threw the deadbolt so hard I thought it might snap. My breath was ragged, loud in the silence, and I pressed my forehead against the cool wall, straining to hear over the pounding in my ears. The knocking didn't stop. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again. But now it was mixed with something worse. Scratching. A long, drawn-out scrape, like fingernails over metal, dragging across the fence in a steady rhythm. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. No signal, not even a bar. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Even though I'd had full service all day, the scratching stopped. The quiet that followed was worse. I backed away from the door, keeping my flashlight aimed at it like a weapon. I couldn't hear anything outside anymore. No knocking, no footsteps, nothing. Then the whisper came again, right against the thin aluminum wall of the RV. Evan. I jumped, my chest seizing with a kind of fear I didn't know a body could feel. I swear I could hear breath behind it, hot and wet, like whoever or whatever said my name was leaning against the wall. I moved to the back of the RV, away from the sound, gripping the flashlight like I'd swing it if I had to. And then, silence again. I waited. 1 minute. 2. The quiet was so complete it made my head ring. My brain begged me to rationalize it. Wind, coyotes, my imagination, exhaustion, anything but the truth I didn't want to believe. I sat down on the edge of my bed, trying to convince myself I'd been dreaming, that if I closed my eyes I'd wake up to sunlight and the sound of birds in the distance. And then the door handle moved. Just the faintest turn. Like someone outside was testing it. Slow. Careful. I lunged forward, grabbed the handle, twisted it back hard, and shouted, "Get out of here!" Silence. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. I stayed there. Hand on the handle until I heard it. Footsteps walking away, soft, bare, gravel crunching under weight, moving toward the fence. I didn't sleep that night. When dawn finally broke, I stepped outside cautiously, half expecting to find footprints or some sign that what I'd heard was real. At first, there was nothing. The gravel looked untouched. The air was still. But then I walked toward the fence, and there they were. Footprints. Human. Bare. Leading from the desert up to the chain-link fence, and stopping there. No return prints, nothing past it, just the endless stretch of sand and stone on the other side. That was when I noticed something else. The fence, right where I'd seen the figure standing the night before, was bent inward. Not outward, like something pressing against it from inside the park. Inward, like something had pulled itself in from the desert side and then stopped. My stomach turned. I went straight to the office, slammed my coffee down on the counter, and told Gail everything. Every single detail, the knocking, the whispers, the figure, the footprints. She just listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't even blink. When I finished, she exhaled smoke slow and steady, then said, "You're not the first." My skin crawled. "They say there's an old trail out past that fence," she went on, "from before the highway. Before even Route 66. Folks used it to move through the desert, wagon trains and settlers. A lot of them didn't make it, too many bodies buried out there, too many names left to the sand. And sometimes, she tapped her cigarette ash into the tray, those names whisper back. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to tell me it was some joke they played on tourists. But she didn't. Instead, she said, "They call it the walker." "The walker?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "Some nights, it comes up to the fence, knocks, calls out to whoever's nearest. If you answer, if you go past that line." She trailed off and looked at me hard. "We don't see those folks again." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "So what am I supposed to do?" "Leave," she said simply. "Leave today. Before dark." That was enough for me. I packed my rig faster than I ever have in my life. The whole time I kept glancing at that fence, half expecting to see that figure standing there again, head cocked, waiting. By noon I was on the highway, the park shrinking in my rear view. The further I got, the more I could breathe again, like I'd been holding air in my lungs for days. But here's the thing. When I stopped for gas a few hours later, I checked my phone. The signal was back, full bars, and there was a voicemail, no number listed, just unknown caller. I hesitated before pressing play, and then I heard it. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more, and then clear as day. Evan. I almost dropped the phone right there at the gas station. The sound was unmistakable. Those same knocks. That same voice. It wasn't possible. I deleted it immediately, but my hands were trembling so badly I nearly hit the wrong button. I told myself it had to be a prank, maybe Gail or someone at the park messing with me. But how would they even get my number? I drove another 100 miles west before stopping for the night at a bigger RV park outside Flagstaff. Lots of lights, lots of people, the kind of place where you feel safer just by proximity. I figured if I stayed in a crowded park for a while, I'd shake the feeling. That night, I parked between 2 big Class A rigs, close enough that I could hear the low hum of someone else's generator. The air smelled faintly of pine instead of dry desert dust. And for a while, I felt better. I even started convincing myself it had all been in my head. Sleep deprivation, stress. Maybe I'd let Gail's creepy little warning burrow too deep into my brain. But around midnight, as I sat there scrolling through my phone, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. It didn't make sense. I wasn't near the fence this time. I was in the middle of the park, surrounded by people. I held my breath, waiting. The sound didn't repeat. Maybe I'd imagined it. I turned my phone off, crawled into bed, and tried to ignore the pounding in my chest. And then my phone buzzed. 1 new voicemail. Unknown caller. I didn't even want to listen, but I couldn't stop myself. I pressed play. 3 knocks. A pause. Then that voice. Evan. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone like it had become something alive and dangerous in my hands. I put it face down on the counter and turned off every light in the RV. I don't know why. It felt instinctual, like somehow darkness would make me less visible. That's when I heard footsteps, soft, slow, crunching the gravel outside. Moving past my rig, I peered through a sliver in the blinds. A figure walked between the rows of RVs. Not hurried, not stumbling like a drunk camper, purposeful, tall. Its movements were unnatural, almost too fluid, like each step bent joints in ways that shouldn't bend. It stopped 2 rigs down from mine, turned its head. Even from that distance, I could feel its attention snap onto me, like it knew exactly where I was hiding. I yanked the blinds shut and crawled backward on the floor until my back hit the cabinets. My breath was coming too fast, sharp enough I worried it would hear. Then came the knocking. Not on my RV, on the ground beneath it. 3 sharp bangs against the undercarriage as if someone was lying on their back and pounding upward. I almost screamed. Instead, I lunged forward, jammed the key into the ignition, and started the engine so fast it nearly stalled. My headlights cut on, spilling white across the gravel lot, and in that flash, I saw it. The figure standing dead center in the road ahead of me, too tall, too thin, its head cocked just slightly to the side. It didn't move, didn't flinch at the sudden light. I slammed the gas. It didn't step aside. It didn't run. It just blinked out. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. I didn't stop. I barreled out of that park so fast, I clipped the curb and sent gravel flying behind me. My hands clenched the wheel so tight I thought my knuckles would split. For hours I drove. Through the night. past empty stretches of highway lit only by the pale wash of my headlights. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed distance. When the sun finally rose, I pulled into a rest stop and killed the engine. My body felt like it was humming from adrenaline. I sat there shaking, watching semis pull in and out, normal people going about their normal lives. That's when I saw the old man. He was parked 2 spots over in a faded blue Winnebago, probably late 60s, with a face leathered from sun and years of travel. He saw me staring and gave me this little nod, like he recognized something in my expression. He walked over, slow, leaning on a cane. "First time you've heard it?" he asked. My mouth went dry. "What?" "The knocks," he said. His voice was rough but calm, like this was a conversation he'd had before. I stared. "You know about it?" He nodded. "They call it a traveler's curse. Doesn't matter where you run. Once you hear it, once it calls your name, it follows." I shook my head hard. No, I left that place. I didn't cross the fence. I didn't." He raised a hand. "Doesn't matter. You heard it. That's all it needs." I wanted to tell him he was crazy. I wanted to believe this was some sick joke. But then he leaned closer and said, "It called me in Oregon. First time was 96. Haven't had a silent night since." I backed up a step. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile, more like pity. "You'll figure it out soon enough. They don't stop knocking." Then he turned and walked back to his Winnebago, climbed in, and shut the door. I stood there frozen in the morning sun, the sound of passing traffic a dull roar in my ears, and for the first time, I realized this wasn't about one park, one night, one mistake. This was bigger. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there staring at that old Winnebago, waiting for him to come back out, to tell me more. Anything. But he didn't. Curtains drawn, door shut. It was like he'd given me his warning and sealed himself back into whatever hell he'd been living in. I climbed into my RV and sat there gripping the wheel. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. His words wouldn't leave my head. "They don't stop knocking." I started driving again, aimlessly, like motion alone would keep me safe. I put hundreds of miles behind me, fueled by fear and caffeine. I crossed into Nevada by late afternoon, passing scrubland and empty gas stations with rusted-out signs until I reached a remote park outside Ely. It was cheap, isolated, and almost deserted, just a few rigs scattered far apart. Normally I'd have avoided a place that empty, but now I wanted distance, space. No neighbors to overhear me screaming if things got bad again. The park host was a man in his 50s, leathery skin, mirrored sunglasses. He barely said 5 words while checking me in, just slid me a site map, pointed to my spot. His silence made me uneasy. I pulled into my site, shut off the engine, and just sat there. The stillness of the desert felt heavier than before, like the air itself was holding something in it I couldn't see. That night, I didn't even bother trying to sleep in bed. I stayed in the driver's seat with the engine off, hands resting near the keys, headlights angled toward the dirt road. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I stayed ready, it wouldn't come. For a while it worked. Hours passed. The desert was silent. Then, just after 2 a.m., the sound started again. Knock, knock, knock. My entire body locked up. It was quieter this time, almost tentative, like whatever it was testing me, reminding me it was still there. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Another 3 knocks, and then a whisper. "You can't run forever, Evan." I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. My throat closed, my chest tight. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it out the window, scanning the fence line. Nothing. Just sand, brush, a lonely picnic table at an empty site across the park. Then the lights went out. Every single light in the park. The office, the few rigs scattered around. Even my own dashboard went dark. My RV was dead silent. No hum of electricity. Nothing. The desert swallowed me whole. The silence pressed against my skull until I thought it would crack. I felt something move outside. Not footsteps this time, more like a ripple through the night, unseen but felt. I heard it at the door. A slow drag of fingernails down the aluminum. Long, deliberate. I lunged for my keys and turned them. Nothing. The engine was dead. My flashlight flickered in my hand, then died too. I sat there in the pitch dark, heart pounding so loud I was sure it could hear me. Knock, 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 right under my seat. I snapped. My hands flew to the door handle, throwing it open, bolting into the cold night barefoot and half blind. Gravel cut into my feet, but I didn't care. I just ran. Away from the RV, away from everything. And then I heard it behind me. Footsteps. Fast. I didn't dare look back. I tore across the park toward the faint outline of the office building, my lungs burning, my mind screaming at me to keep going. I reached the porch, pounded on the door. "Help!" I shouted. "Somebody!" The door swung open. The park host stood there, calm as could be. He looked at me for a long moment, then glanced past me into the dark. "Should have stayed inside," he said quietly. My breath hitched. "You know about it?" He didn't answer. He just stepped aside. "Get in. Now." I stumbled past him into the office. The air inside was warm, stale, reeking of coffee and dust. He shut the door behind me, locked it, then pulled down a heavy black curtain over the window. "Don't look out there," he said. I didn't argue. I collapsed into a chair, chest heaving. "What is it?" I managed to choke out. He sat down across from me, folded his hands, and said, "We call it the walker here. Some call it the knocker. Other parks got different names, but it's all the same thing." I stared at him. "It follows people?" He nodded slowly. "Not everyone, just the ones who hear it." I shook my head. I didn't cross any fence. I didn't answer it. I didn't. "Doesn't matter," he cut in. "Hearing it's enough. Once you know it's out there, it's yours." My stomach dropped. "How do I make it stop?" He looked at me then, really looked, and what I saw in his eyes made me want to vomit. "You don't." The words hung heavy between us. He leaned back in his chair, sighing like a man who'd said it too many times before. I've been running from it since '04, Oregon coast, South Jetty, thought it was a joke back then, until I started hearing the knocks every night. I stared at him, my voice trembling. "How do you live with it?" He smirked, bitter. "You don't. You just keep your wheels turning. Never stay anywhere too long. Don't go out after dark, and if it knocks, don't you ever knock back." I sat there shaking, his words sinking in like ice water. Outside, something scraped along the siding of the office. Long, slow. We both froze. Knock, knock, knock. The park host didn't even flinch. "See?" he whispered. I closed my eyes, my pulse roaring in my ears. For the first time, I realized I might never be rid of it, and that was when I heard my phone buzz again from my pocket. One new voicemail. Unknown caller. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone. The park host gave me a hard look and shook his head, almost imperceptibly. "Don't play it," he whispered, but I couldn't stop myself. I pressed it to my ear. 3 knocks. A pause. Then the whisper, "Evan, open the door." I nearly dropped the phone. I didn't even realize I'd started backing up until my shoulders hit the wall. The host stood, grabbed the phone from my hand, and snapped it in half like it was nothing. The screen cracked with a sharp pop. I gasped. "Rule number 1, he said calmly, tossing the pieces into the trash. "You don't answer it. Not the knocks, not the calls, not ever." But then, another sound, from the roof. Thud. A heavy weight shifted overhead, slow, deliberate. We both looked up. The ceiling creaked. "It's on top of us," I whispered. The host nodded once, almost grimly. "Don't speak to it." The air felt wrong, too heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm, but worse, thick enough I could feel it pressing on my chest. The ceiling groaned again, and then, "Knock! Knock! Knock!" I pressed my hands over my ears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. The host just stared at the door. "It's testing you," he muttered. The lights flickered, then died completely. We were plunged into darkness. I don't know how long we stood there, frozen, listening to it move, slow steps pacing along the roof. Then it dropped down. I heard the crunch of gravel outside the door, then silence. The host leaned closer to me and whispered, "Don't move." We waited, and then came the sound I'll never forget. A single slow drag of something sharp across the wood of the door. Not nails, not claws. Something harder, heavier. It vibrated through the floor. My breath was so loud I was sure it would hear. The host's voice was barely audible. "It wants you to open it, wants you to look. Don't." Seconds stretched like hours. Then, footsteps. backing away. I felt my lungs seize, desperate to believe it was leaving. But then, right outside the door, Evan. I don't know what possessed me, but I snapped. I yanked the curtain aside and looked. It was standing in the floodlight glow from the empty street lamp. Tall, thin, skin like bleached leather stretched too tight, its head cocked at that impossible angle, mouth fixed in something that wasn't quite a smile. Its eyes, if you could even call them eyes, looked black and hollow, but somehow I knew it was staring straight into me. And then it lifted its hand, knuckles like bone-white stone, and it knocked. 3 deliberate taps against the glass. The sound reverberated through my skull. My knees buckled. The host yanked me back from the window and shouted, "Don't answer it!" His voice cracked with something like desperation. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was like those hollow eyes pinned me in place. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed inside me. Like it wasn't just outside anymore. It was in my chest, in my ribs, shaking me apart. I screamed loud, raw, and that was when it smiled. Not a human smile. Too wide, too many teeth. The door handle rattled, then twisted. The host lunged forward, slamming his shoulder against it. "You're not coming in," he growled. The thing tilted its head further, unnatural, bones snapping like dry twigs. And then it vanished. No sound, no fade, just gone. The silence after was deafening. We stayed there all night. Neither of us moved from that office until sunrise. When the light finally hit the windows, we dared to open the door. Outside, the gravel was marked with deep impressions. Not footprints, claw-like gouges. The host didn't speak. He just handed me my keys and said, "You keep driving, son. You hear it again. You don't stop. You don't answer. Ever." I left without looking back. For days I drove. Through Nevada, Utah, Colorado. Every night, I heard it. Knocks under the floor. Whispers through the vents. Some nights I saw it walking along the roadside in my headlights, matching my speed, just far enough that I couldn't make out its face. I haven't stopped moving since, and I've realized something. These aren't just stories to scare people around campfires. These aren't harmless legends about haunted rest stops or ghostly hitchhikers. They're warnings. Warnings for people like me. Warnings we ignore until it's too late. If you're out there in your RV, parked in some lonely stretch of desert or pine forest, and you hear that sound, 3 knocks, slow and steady, don't answer it. Don't go outside. Don't even look. Because once you do, it learns your name. I kept driving for weeks. The odometer rolled over like it was mocking me, mile after mile blurring into one endless ribbon of asphalt. Every RV park I passed felt smaller, emptier, even the ones crammed with people and neon signs promising free Wi-Fi and full hookups. No place felt safe anymore. And every night, it followed. Sometimes it was just the knocking, under the chassis, against the walls, so faint I wondered if I imagined it. Other nights, I'd hear footsteps pacing outside, slow and patient. Once, in a wooded campground in Colorado, I caught a glimpse of it between the trees, those hollow black eyes fixed on me even through the dark, head cocked in that same impossible angle. I'd leave before sunrise every time, running from shadows that always seemed to find me anyway. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the silence during the day. The stillness that gave me room to think. To remember that old man at the rest stop, his haunted eyes when he said he hadn't had a silent night since 1996. I started wondering how long I could live like this. I tried everything. New phone numbers, different rigs. I sold my Class C and bought a used fifth wheel, thinking maybe it was tied to the vehicle. No difference. The first night I parked, knock, knock, knock. I even went off-grid for a while. No parks, no hookups, just BLM land deep in the desert. No fences, no neighbors, nothing but empty earth stretching forever. I thought maybe I could outdistance it, hide where it couldn't find me. But it did. I woke one night to find my RV door wide open, dust blowing inside and footprints, bare, human, leading in from the sand and stopping right at my bed. I don't remember screaming, but I remember waking up slumped in the driver's seat, engine running, hands clenched around the wheel like I'd been gripping it for hours. That was when I knew. This wasn't about the parks or the fences or even the places themselves. It was older than all of it. Everywhere I went, I started asking questions. I talked to hosts in dusty offices who looked at me too long before answering. I talked to travelers who wouldn't meet my eyes when I brought it up, who packed their rigs in silence and left before dawn. I found old threads on forgotten message boards, stories buried so deep online they felt like confessions. Every tale was different. Different parks, different names, different faces, but the details were the same. The knocks, the whisper calling you by name, the figure just beyond the edge of the firelight. It wasn't confined to one place or one state. It stretched across the map, stitched together by highways and campsites and sleepless nights. From Florida swamps to Oregon forests to the barren edges of the Texas panhandle, always the same thing. Always patient, always waiting. And every person who'd heard it, none of them ever escaped it. Some disappeared. Their rigs found abandoned, lights still on, doors swinging open in the wind. Others kept moving, like me, circling the country endlessly, never staying anywhere longer than a night. I met one man in Wyoming who swore he hadn't slept indoors in 5 years, said tents gave him more warning when it came near. His eyes were sunken, his voice hollow. I asked him once why he didn't just stop. He looked at me like I was insane. "You think it stops if you stop?" he said. "It wants you to sit still. It wants you to listen." That night, I heard it again. Louder than ever. 3 knocks, so sharp they rattled dishes in my cabinets. Then the whisper, right against the thin aluminum wall by my bed. "Evan, come outside." I lay there, frozen, staring at the ceiling. My heart felt like it was going to punch through my ribs. I thought about every story I'd read, every person who'd vanished after answering it. And I understood then it doesn't just want you to see it. It wants you to obey. It waits. It wears you down, night after night, knock after knock, until fear turns to exhaustion and exhaustion turns to surrender. But I'm not going to give it that. I've changed the way I travel. I don't pick random parks anymore. I research every place, every review, every strange story whispered by travelers over campfires and coffee counters. I map out the legends, the walker in Arizona, the knocker in Utah, the fence caller in Nevada. They're all the same thing, wearing different names like masks. And I keep moving, always moving. Because I've learned something. These legends don't survive because they're made up. They survive because they're true. They survive because people like me keep living long enough to tell them. And that's why I'm telling you now. If you're out there in your RV, parked in some lonely stretch of America where the wind dies down and the world goes silent and you hear it, 3 slow knocks. Don't open the door. Don't look out the window. Don't answer the phone if it calls you. Because once you do, it learns your name. And once it knows your name, you'll never be alone again. Every legend has a seed of truth in it. I used to think that was just a saying. Now I know it's the only thing keeping me alive. When you camp out there, under the stars, with nothing but thin walls between you and the endless dark, you start to understand what fear really is. It's not about ghosts or monsters hiding in the woods. It's about that knock in the night, that whisper at the door, and the terrible knowledge that if you answer, you won't ever come back inside. So take this as your warning, because the next time you're parked at some quiet little RV park, miles from the nearest town, and you hear that sound in the dead of night, knock, 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 it might not be just the wind, and if you listen closely enough, you might hear it say your name. I had always believed that the desert was silent, that if you listened long enough, you'd hear nothing but wind, the distant call of a coyote, maybe the crunch of your own boots on dry ground. But standing there in New Mexico, staring up at that sandstone cliff carved by centuries of wind and grit, I realized silence wasn't what I heard at all. It was something worse. It was the sound of absence, like the land was holding its breath, waiting. My name's Aaron. I'm 32, and for the past year, I've been living out of my RV, traveling across the Southwest, painting and sketching landscapes as I went. Art had been my way of grounding myself after everything else in my life fell apart. My job, my relationship, my apartment in Austin that felt like a shoebox filled with stale air. Out here in the emptiness, I felt like I could breathe again. But emptiness has a way of filling itself if you let it. I'd parked my RV in a small Bureau of Land Management campsite just north of Shiprock. No hookups, no nearby towns, just a scattering of old picnic tables warped by sun and sand. I loved it. No cell service, no noise. Just me, my sketchbook, and miles of red desert. I had this habit of wandering until I found something to draw, then camping nearby so I could study how the light changed over it across the day. That afternoon, I stumbled on a sandstone outcrop a mile from camp. It wasn't tall, maybe 20 feet, but it had this strange shape to it. At first, I thought it was just erosion, but when I squinted, the formation looked like a face tilted back, mouth wide open in a scream, its hollow eyes gouged deep by centuries of wind. I froze. The lines weren't perfect, they never are, but it was uncanny, the way its shadows deepened at dusk, how the sinking sun caught its teeth in sharp relief. It felt like it was begging or maybe warning, its voice swallowed by stone. I should have walked away, but I didn't. Instead, I sat cross-legged in front of it with my sketch pad, tracing every ridge, every shadow. I told myself it was just an artist's obsession, like when you can't stop drawing the same curve until you understand it. I stayed there until dark, using my headlamp for the final lines, until my fingers cramped around my pencil. When I finally looked up, the desert felt different. The air had cooled, and in the moonlight, the sandstone face seemed even sharper. It almost looked like it had moved, just slightly tilted forward, its empty eyes catching me like they knew I was there. I shook it off, hiked back to the RV, and told myself I'd been staring too long. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that screaming shape. I'd roll over, telling myself I was just overtired, that solitude was messing with my head. Around midnight, I heard something, a dry scrape. Soft at first, then closer. I sat up, heart pounding. My RV was locked tight. I glanced out the window, expecting nothing but moonlit sand. But in the dust around my campsite, footprints. Not boot prints, not paws. Bare feet, small, dozens of them, circling. I yanked the curtains shut and sat there, clutching my sketch pad like it was a weapon. I didn't move until dawn. When I finally worked up the courage to go outside, the prints were gone, wiped away overnight like the wind had erased them clean. But my stomach dropped when I looked down at my sketch pad. I'd left it on the little dinette table by the window, half finished when I went to bed. The face I'd drawn had changed. The mouth was wider now, unhinged impossibly far. The teeth jagged like broken glass. Thin lines trickled from its hollow eyes, streaking down its stone cheeks like tears. I flipped back through my earlier sketches, convinced I was losing it. No, my lines hadn't looked like that before. I told myself I must have drawn it in my sleep, some kind of bizarre muscle memory. It wasn't possible, but what else could it be? I crumpled the page and shoved it in my pack. By mid-morning, I convinced myself to hike back out there. I needed to prove it was just a rock. The desert was empty. Too empty. Even the usual sound of distant birds seemed swallowed up. When I reached the formation, I froze again. Its mouth, God, I swear it looked wider. Not enough to be certain, but enough to make me step back. Heart pounding. I drew again, fast, messy lines that didn't feel like mine. By the time I stopped, my fingers were stiff with sand grit, and the sketch looked worse than before. The mouth wasn't just screaming now, it was yawning open, black and bottomless, like it could swallow the sky. Back at camp, I threw my sketch pad face down on the counter and didn't touch it for hours. I tried cooking, tried reading, even pulled out my old laptop to distract myself, but my reflection in the dark screen stopped me cold. It wasn't my face, not exactly. The features were there. My hair, my jawline, but my face looked faded, like someone had rubbed out parts of me with an eraser. The edges of my cheeks were blurry, my mouth pale and indistinct. I blinked hard, splashed water on my face, convinced it was exhaustion. But when I looked into the bathroom mirror, it was worse. My lips were gone. Just gone. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own boots. My heart thudded in my ears, my breath coming short and sharp. I clawed at my skin, feeling the shape of my mouth still there, even if the mirror refused to show it. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat with every light on in the RV, staring at my reflection until my eyes burned. Outside, I heard the wind rise, carrying with it something that almost sounded like whispers. Not words, just soft hissing, like sand slipping through clenched hands. Around 3 in the morning, I heard another scrape, closer this time, against the RV door. My sketch pad slid off the counter on its own, falling open to that face. Its mouth stretched wider still, and this time, I swear I saw it move. I don't know what possessed me, but I reached for the pencil again. My hand moved like it wasn't mine, dragging lines too deep, too harsh. The harder I drew, the louder the wind seemed to howl until it wasn't wind anymore. It was a scream. When I finally dropped the pencil, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold it. I looked up at the mirror again, and my face, what was left of it, was almost unrecognizable. And outside, in the faint glow of my porch light, I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them. Small, sand-colored, their faces blank and smooth like dunes sculpted by the wind. They stood perfectly still, ringed around my RV. Waiting. I locked the door, I turned out the light, and I prayed I'd still be here when the sun came up. The sun didn't feel like salvation the next morning. It felt like a deadline. I woke up slumped in the driver's seat, every muscle locked with exhaustion. My first instinct was to check the mirror above the RV sink. I hesitated for a long time, staring at the cabinet door closed over it, my hand trembling before I swung it open. What I saw nearly knocked the breath out of me. My mouth was back, but faint, like it had been drawn in pencil. My nose looked blurred, tête, too, half erased around the edges. My skin had a dull, grainy look to it, almost as if it wasn't skin at all, but layers of sand brushed into shape. I stumbled backward, hitting the counter, knocking over my coffee mug from yesterday. It shattered against the floor, but I barely heard it. The wind outside had risen again, rattling the metal siding, and buried in its howl was something else. A low, rhythmic sound, almost like chanting, carried faint and broken through the air. I grabbed my keys. My instincts screamed, "Leave. Get out. Drive until this campsite is nothing but a memory." But when I stepped outside, I froze. The footprints were back, bare, small, circling the RV in tight loops like a ritual. And there, by the driver's side door, a new one. A single deeper print, not bare, a boot, a man's size pressed firmly into the dust. I scanned the desert, my chest tight. At first there was nothing. Then I saw him, standing at the edge of the sandstone outcrop in the distance, so still I thought he might be part of the rock itself. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, his clothes coated in desert grit like he'd been out here for decades. I should have run. Instead, I shouted across the silence, "Hey!" He didn't move, didn't wave. Just stood there, staring. Or at least I think he was. From this distance, his face was just a shadow beneath that hat. My throat went dry. "Do you need help?" My voice cracked. He tilted his head, slow as a dying clock hand. Not toward me, toward the sandstone screaming face. Then he raised his hand and pointed. I turned to look. For a split second, I thought I'd imagined it. The stone face's mouth had widened again. An impossible gap yawning deeper, dark enough to swallow a grown person whole. Its shadows seemed to twist in the rising sun, teeth jagged, ridges bending in a way that rock shouldn't. When I looked back toward the man, he was gone. I don't remember running back into the RV. I only remember slamming the door and fumbling for the ignition, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the keys. I tore out of that sight, the gravel spitting under my tires. My eyes darted to the mirrors, and every time I saw something worse. First, my face, blurring more with each glance. My lips faint, my eyes smudged, like my reflection wasn't mine anymore. Then the shapes behind me. They weren't following exactly. They didn't need to. They just stood, scattered in the sand, growing smaller in my rear view, their blank, featureless heads all turned toward me, watching. I drove until the road curved back toward Shiprock, my knuckles bone white on the wheel. Only then did I finally stop. But stopping didn't help. Because when I looked up through the windshield, I saw it, a reflection in the glass. Not my face, not exactly. It looked like me, but it wasn't drawn right. My features were too smooth, my eyes hollow, my mouth stretched in a scream I couldn't hear. I scrambled for the visor mirror, my breath ragged. My reflection there was worse. My whole face was smeared, blurred into rough strokes as if it had been sketched in haste and abandoned halfway through. And then my sketch pad slid off the passenger seat, thumping open against the floor. The pages flipped on their own, faster than I could grab them. Every drawing, every landscape, every cliffside I'd ever captured shifted in lines that weren't mine. Each page warped, sand-colored shapes rising in the margins, faces without detail standing just beyond the edges of my art. At the end, it stopped. The last page wasn't of the sandstone face anymore. It was of me, drawn without eyes, without a mouth. My head tilted back like the screaming rock, my features erased into blank sand. That's when I heard it again. The whispers. Closer now, inside the RV. I twisted, scanning every corner, every shadow. Nothing. Until my gaze fell back to the windshield. The glass was fogging over from the inside. But it wasn't breath. The fog outlined shapes. Fingers. Pressing outward. I slammed the RV in gear and drove, I don't even know how far. Hours blurred together until my gas light came on and I found myself at a lonely truck stop off Highway 491. I parked under the harsh glow of the sodium lights, gripping the wheel until my hands ached. When I finally looked into the mirror again, my face was back. Mostly. But my lips, they still looked faint, as if someone had traced them lightly in dust. I splashed water on my skin, rubbed at it until it burned, but nothing changed. I sat there all night, parked beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, surrounded by the distant hum of semis. I told myself I was safe now, that it was just exhaustion, isolation, some sun-scorched hallucination. But at dawn, I reached for my sketch pad again, maybe to destroy it, maybe just to prove to myself it was still normal. When I opened it, there was only one page left. Blank, except for faint pencil marks forming slowly, line by line, all on their own. They weren't of the sandstone face. They weren't even of me. They were of someone else, standing right outside my RV window. And then I heard the knock. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knock came again, slow, deliberate, not a fist, not knuckles. It was softer, hollow, like someone tapping bone against metal. I stayed frozen in the driver's seat, staring dead ahead. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the silhouette through the side curtain, still, unmoving. Then came the whisper. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language I'd ever heard. But I understood it, not with my mind, something deeper. The kind of understanding that bypasses words and scrapes against the inside of your bones. It said, "Let me see your face." I grabbed my keys again, but the engine wouldn't turn. Just a dry click. Over and over, I pounded the dashboard. The RV, which had never failed me, sat dead and still under the rising sun. The whisper came again, closer, just behind my ear. "Show me your face." I lunged to the back, yanked open the small storage cabinet where I kept the emergency tools, pulled out the rusted old hammer I'd carried since my first trip. I didn't even know what I was planning. Swing at shadows? Break my own windows? None of it made sense. The third knock came. This time it rattled the frame. I held my breath and flung the curtain aside. Nothing. Just the empty truck stop parking lot. But there on the window was a smear, a perfect imprint, not of a face, not of a hand, but of a mouth. Wide open, screaming, drawn in sand. I stumbled back, dropping the hammer. My sketch pad lay open on the floor, the drawing now fully complete. A figure with my outline, my hair, my clothing, but no face. Just a swirling void where my features should have been. And behind that figure, hundreds more. Smooth-faced, watching. I grabbed it, ripped the page out, crumpled it, stuffed it into the tiny steel sink, and lit it with the emergency lighter I kept for candles. The flames caught quickly, the paper curling, blackening, until the center of the page, the figure's face, refused to burn. It sat there, pulsing in the ash, a mouth stretched wide, still intact. The sink hissed. A sudden gust blew through the RV, though every door and window was shut. My ears popped, like pressure had dropped. The hair on my arm stood on end. That's when I saw it again, in the mirror behind me. Not my face, not even close. It was the sandstone face, tilted, screaming, the eyes sunk so deep they bled into black. But it was wearing my clothes, holding my posture, moving when I moved. I turned slowly, heart in my throat, nothing behind me, just the stale air and the hum of a dying battery. I climbed into the back, locked every door manually, and curled into the narrow bunk, my sketch pad clutched to my chest like a shield. I whispered over and over, "It's not real, it's not real." But I didn't sleep. When I opened my eyes again, it wasn't because I'd rested. It was because something inside me jolted awake. There were more smears on the windows, 4, each perfectly spaced, each shaped like screaming mouths. I pulled the curtains. I couldn't handle it anymore. I stayed parked at that truck stop for 2 more nights. I didn't leave. I didn't sketch. I didn't even eat. I watched my reflection fade and return, like a tide I couldn't control. On the 3rd day, the engine turned over like nothing had ever been wrong. I drove east without stopping all the way through Albuquerque, then Santa Rosa, until the desert started giving way to grassland. But the face followed. It was in every gas station mirror, every chrome reflection, every puddle, a screaming mouth in sand. Now I don't draw anymore. I've tried. God knows I've tried, but every time I put pencil to paper, the lines curve wrong. I start sketching a mountain ridge, and halfway through, it tilts into a jaw. I try a tree, and it twists into an open mouth. The desert did something to me, took something I didn't know could be taken. Some nights I wake up and I don't recognize myself in the mirror. I'll stare for minutes, touching my face, counting my features, whispering my name like it's a spell to hold myself together. But worse than that are the mornings when I do recognize myself, because that's when I realize the reflection is too perfect. No blemishes, no lines, just smooth, unnatural, as if someone is remembering me wrong. And sometimes when I pass people in truck stops or small town diners, they'll pause, look at me a little too long, and they'll say, "You look like someone I saw in the desert once." I always smile and nod because I'm afraid if I say the wrong thing, if I make the wrong face, they'll see the mouth and it'll scream again. And this time, I won't be able to stop drawing it, even if it means losing my face for good. I started avoiding mirrors entirely. That was the only way I could cope. I duct taped the bathroom mirror shut in my RV, covered the visor mirrors with scraps of cardboard. Even the glossy finish on my stovetop made my skin crawl. I didn't want to see it anymore. But reflections don't care if you're looking. The first time I saw it without meaning to, I was filling my tank at a station outside Tucumcari. The RV's window glass caught me at just the right angle. Me, standing there in the sun, staring at my own silhouette, only it wasn't me. The mouth was gone, completely erased. A smooth blankness where my features should have been. I staggered back, knocking the gas nozzle free. Diesel sprayed across my boots, sharp and chemical, but I barely felt it. A guy pumping gas across from me shouted, "Hey, you okay?" I didn't answer. I slammed the nozzle back into place, jumped into the driver's seat, and tore out of there before I could even wipe the smell from my hands. That night, parked in an empty rest area, I couldn't help myself. I peeled the tape off the mirror in the bathroom. I wish I hadn't. The face looking back at me was only half mine. One side normal, eye, cheek, jaw intact. The other side was dissolving, the skin crumbling like sand under a slow breeze. As I stared, I swear I saw grains fall, scattering down my shoulder, vanishing before they hit the sink. I turned away so fast I slammed my shoulder into the wall, breathing hard. I wanted to run, but run where? I sat down hard on the floor of the RV. That's when I noticed my sketch pad sitting where I'd left it under the bunk. I hadn't touched it since the truck stop. It should have been closed, but it was open. Pages fanned out like fingers. On the top page was a new drawing. Not of me, not of the sandstone face. It was of my RV, parked exactly where I was now. Every detail perfect, down to the peeling bumper sticker on the back corner. But standing outside it, drawn faintly in rough lines, was another figure. Its body was thin, barely human-shaped, but its head It was shaped like that sandstone formation, mouth wide open, endless blackness pouring from it in streaks of graphite. And behind it, farther out, were dozens of others. I closed the book. I shoved it into a drawer and slammed it shut. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the driver's seat, staring out at the empty lot. The wind whistled across the plains. The shadows of the desert seemed to follow me even here, pressing in at the edges of my headlights like they were waiting for me to kill the engine. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. The whisper. "Let me see your face." It didn't come from outside. It came from right behind my head. I spun around, hammer in hand, swinging blindly. Nothing there. But my breath fogged the air, even though it was warm. And the fog hung in front of me longer than it should have, twisting, shaping itself. It looked like a mouth. I backed up until my shoulder blades hit the windshield. The hammer slipped from my hand. Then I heard the faintest scrape from the rear of the RV. A single, slow drag, like someone running their hand along the siding. I bolted to the front, fired the engine, and floored it. The RV roared down the highway, headlights carving through the night. Every shadow on the road felt alive. Every road sign seemed to tilt as I passed, pointing me somewhere I didn't want to go. By dawn, I'd reached a diner in Amarillo. I parked in plain sight under their neon sign and staggered inside like a drunk. The waitress took one look at me and frowned. "Rough night?" she asked. I tried to laugh, but it came out hoarse. "You could say that." She poured coffee and slid it over. But she didn't leave. She lingered, staring at me with a strange intensity. "You know," she said slowly, "you got the kind of face I've seen before." I froze. She tilted her head. "Out west, back when I used to live near Gallup, my dad used to tell stories about people going missing out there. Said the desert didn't just take you, it replaced you, sent something back that looked close enough." I swallowed. My throat felt like sandpaper. "What happened to them?" Her eyes narrowed. "They stopped showing up in mirrors, she said." The coffee shook in my hands. I didn't answer. I didn't stay. I threw down cash and bolted before she could ask more. Back in the RV, I checked the bathroom mirror again, and this time I didn't see anything at all, not even my outline, just empty glass. And then, faintly, like a shadow leaking in from the corner of my vision, I saw movement behind me. I turned, and the back door of the RV was open. I didn't remember unlocking it. The cold air rushed in, carrying the dry, gritty scent of the desert, even though I was miles from it. My breath hitched in my chest. I grabbed the hammer again and crept toward the open door, each step loud against the silence of the RV. Outside, nothing moved. The lot was empty, the diner's neon sign buzzing faintly in the distance. No footsteps, no shadows, just the yawning dark beyond the glow of the parking lights. Then I looked down. In the thin layer of dust on the RV's threshold was a mark. Not a footprint, not quite. It looked like a pressed shape, an oval where a heel should be, then nothing but dragged lines trailing off the edge, like whatever made it hadn't walked so much as been pulled along. A whisper caught in the wind. "Let me see your face." I slammed the door, locked it 3 times, and backed away until my spine hit the fridge. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would burst. The RV seemed smaller now, every corner filled with unseen weight. Then I heard it. Not outside, not behind me. From the bathroom, a faint scratching, like pencil on paper. I edged forward, gripping the hammer until my knuckles screamed. The sound grew louder, quicker, urgent, as though whoever was drawing couldn't stop. When I reached the door, I pressed my ear to it. Scritch, scritch, scritch. My fingers trembled on the handle. I yanked it open. The mirror was uncovered, and taped to it, my sketch pad, flipped open to a fresh page. Lines sprawled across it in frantic looping strokes, forming my RV, my clothes, my hair. But the face, it wasn't there. It was just a void, black pencil gouged so deep it nearly tore through the paper. As I stared, the pencil lifted on its own. It floated, trembling in the air, then pressed back to the page, and it began to draw. Not me this time, something else. A figure standing behind me. I spun around, swinging the hammer. Empty. But when I looked back at the mirror, it was there. Tall, thin, smooth-faced. its head tilted back, mouth stretching wide, not screaming, not exactly. It looked like inhaling, like pulling something in. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the sink. My reflection remained absent, but the thing's shape stayed. Closer now. Then the bathroom light flickered. Once, twice. Out. The air turned freezing cold. I could hear my breath rushing ragged in the dark, and layered beneath it, faint, rasping, was the sound of wind carrying that whisper again. "Let me see your face." I bolted. Out of the bathroom, past the kitchenette, slamming the lock on the main door, firing up the RV's engine so hard it roared like thunder. I floored it out of the diner lot, tearing onto the highway. The headlights stretched thin across empty asphalt. My hands shook so bad I could barely keep straight. But then, something moved in the beams. A shape at the roadside, standing perfectly still, its face, or lack of one, turned toward me, and then another, and another. Every 100 feet more appeared, thin figures smoothed over by shadow and dust, just standing, waiting. By the time I realized they weren't stationary, it was too late. The first one stepped onto the road. I swerved hard, tires screaming. The RV fishtailed, gravel spraying. My heart slammed into my throat. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could hear was the wind, rushing past, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter. Not human, not loud, just the dry rasp of sand shifting endlessly like it had learned to mimic joy. By the time I pulled over, miles later, shaking and breathless, the highway behind me was empty. But in the distance, on the horizon, I could see them, lined up in a row, waiting. And for the first time since it all began, I realized something that turned my stomach cold. They weren't coming toward me. I was heading toward them. I didn't want to keep driving, but stopping felt worse. The highway stretched endlessly, flat and straight under the pale wash of moonlight, the desert pressing in from both sides like it was funneling me forward. I gripped the wheel so tight my fingers went numb, my eyes burning from the strain of not blinking. Every few miles, I saw them, standing farther out now beyond the shoulder, half buried in sand like forgotten statues. Some leaned at angles, heads tilted back toward the sky, their blank faces catching pale light. Others crouched low, limbs bent too sharp to be human. And always, that sense they weren't still. I glanced once in the side mirror, just once, and nearly veered off the road. One stood directly behind the RV. I slammed my foot on the gas. The speedometer needle jumped. The engine groaned under the strain, but I couldn't stop. Every exit I passed felt wrong, like the signs bent subtly away from me, their arrows pointing back west, even when I knew I was driving east. Somewhere near the Texas border, my gas light flicked on. Panic surged hot through my veins. I hadn't seen a station in hours, and the highway was dead silent. No other cars, no trucks, nothing but the hum of tires on asphalt and that choking emptiness pressing closer with each mile. Then up ahead, a sign. Gas, 2 miles. I nearly sobbed with relief. I pulled off onto the exit ramp, following a cracked 2-lane road that wound between skeletal windbreaks. The station appeared like a ghost in the distance, one flickering light, a single pump, and a squat concrete building that looked abandoned even in daylight. I rolled to a stop and killed the engine. The quiet that followed felt deafening. As I stepped out, the air hit me, cold and dry, smelling faintly of dust and something else, metallic. I grabbed the nozzle, swiped my card. It beeped, processed, clicked over. Normal. Ordinary. Until I noticed the footprints. Not boots, not shoes. Bare, small. Leading from the pump to the darkened door of the building. I froze. Something moved inside, just a flicker in the shadows through the smeared glass window. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of my head's, but my turned. I squeezed the handle on the pump, eyes fixed on the window. A shape shifted again. Tall. Still. The pump clicked off. I didn't even replace the nozzle. I just dove back into the RV, locked the doors, and fired the engine. That's when I heard it. A tap. On the passenger side window. Slow. Deliberate. I whipped my head toward it, and there it was. A face. Or something pretending to be one. Sand coated its skin, its mouth open in that same silent scream I'd sketched days ago. Eyes black pits, no depth, no light, It pressed closer to the glass, and I swear I saw grains of dust trickle down, collecting on the window ledge. Then came the whisper, muffled through the glass but clear as if it were in my ear. "Let me see your face." I slammed the gear shift, flooring the accelerator. The RV lurched forward, tires squealing. The figure vanished in the rear view, but only because another stood farther down the road. And another. And another. I swerved between them, knuckles white, until the desert swallowed them all in darkness. I didn't stop again until dawn, when exhaustion finally won. I pulled off on a dirt road somewhere near Wichita Falls and parked under a dead tree. I shut the engine off, shaking, drenched in sweat. In the silence that followed, I heard scratching again, from under the RV this time. I climbed down slowly, hammer in hand. The air was dead still, dry enough to crack my lips. I crouched, heart hammering. Beneath the RV, nothing, just sand, undisturbed. But when I stood, I saw my sketch pad lying on the ground. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even opened the drawer I'd shoved it in. It was flipped open to a page I hadn't drawn. The screaming sandstone face stared back. But this time it wasn't carved in rock. It was mine. My features erased, my mouth yawning wide, hair drawn in frantic graphite slashes, and beneath it scrawled in shaky lines I didn't recognize were 4 words, "You belong to us." I don't remember getting back inside. I don't remember locking the door. I just remember the wind picking up, rattling the siding, carrying that same dry whisper that has been following me since New Mexico. I still hear it now. I think it's closer. I barely slept that night. I lay in the bunk, clutching the hammer like it could somehow protect me, my eyes locked on the ceiling as shadows crept and shifted in the corners. Every time I blinked, I thought I saw movement, just out of sight, too fast to catch. At some point, exhaustion overtook me. I woke to the sound of paper tearing. I shot upright, heart pounding. My sketch pad lay open on the floor beside the bunk, pages slowly ripping themselves out, one by one, each sheet fluttering into the air like dry leaves. I scrambled down and snatched it up. The pages were blank, every single one. I flipped faster, desperate, frantic, every drawing I'd ever done. The landscapes, the cliffs, even my earliest sketches from months back, all gone. Just empty sheets, the faint indentations of erased pencil lines etched deep enough to catch the light. Then at the very back, I found a single drawing left intact. It was of me. Only this time, it wasn't faceless. It was perfect, too perfect. Clean lines, sharp features, every detail precise, like someone else had traced me from memory. But my eyes weren't mine. They were hollow, black pits. Underneath it, in the same jagged handwriting as before, was a new phrase. "Stop running." A sound echoed through the RV, a soft, hollow tap against the window near the dinette. I froze. Another tap, louder. I crept toward the window, slow, every step making the old floor groan. When I reached the curtain, I hesitated. My hands shook so hard I could barely grab the fabric. I pulled it aside and saw my own face staring back. It was me, same hair, same clothes, same trembling posture. But its mouth was open wider than humanly possible, gaping black and soundless. Its hands pressed flat against the glass, fingers leaving trails of fine grit on the pane. I staggered back, tripping over the table leg. The curtain dropped back into place. The tapping stopped, but when I looked at the bathroom mirror from across the RV, I saw it again. Not outside, inside, standing behind me. I spun around, hammer raised, but nothing was there. I backed into the corner, breath ragged, the wind outside howling against the siding. I squeezed my eyes shut. I told myself it wasn't real, that sleep deprivation was eating me alive. But then I heard the door unlock. Click. My eyes snapped open. The latch on the RV's main door hung loose. Slowly, deliberately, the handle began to turn. I lunged forward, slammed it shut, threw the deadbolt back in place. My pulse roared in my ears. Then, from just beyond the door, a whisper, "We have your face now." Every light in the RV flickered. The bathroom mirror shattered with a sharp gunshot crack. I screamed, pressing my back to the door. The wind rose higher, shrieking now, carrying that sound of shifting sand. It filled the RV, the cabinets rattling, the walls groaning. I thought the whole thing was about to rip apart, until just as suddenly it stopped. Dead silence. I didn't dare move for hours. I sat there on the floor, my hands clamped over my mouth, afraid to breathe too loud. When dawn finally came, I opened the door. There were footprints everywhere, hundreds of them, small, bare, circling my RV like a ritual ring. In the center of them, drawn into the dust, was my face. Perfect, smooth, empty-eyed. I slammed the door shut and drove. I didn't even know where I was going, just away. But no matter how far I drive, I still see them, standing on the shoulders of highways, lurking at the edges of truck stops, reflected in glass storefronts. And every time I look in a mirror now, I see nothing at all. Just a blank sheet, waiting for something else to draw me in. And last night, in the faint reflection on my window, I swear I saw a pencil moving, on its own. I had heard the stories for years, late-night whispers traded around campfires, muttered at dimly lit diners off desert highways, always with the same uneasy pause that came before the name, Mr. Volkswagen. If you've been camping long enough in the Southwest, you've probably heard it too, though never the same way twice. A phantom van spotted in remote campgrounds where no vehicle should be. A man, or something like one, leaning out the driver's window, smiling in the glow of an old dome light. The legend always ended with someone going missing, their campsite left intact but abandoned. I used to dismiss it as one of those roadside myths meant to spook newbies, like the hitchhiker who vanishes when you stop, or the ghost truck that chases you down a forgotten stretch of Route 66. But last October, parked in a remote corner of Arizona's Sonoran Desert, I learned that some legends grow from something real, something alive. And I'm here to tell you why I no longer laugh at the name Mr. Volkswagen. I was traveling solo in my '87 Westphalia, a faded green I'd patched together with years of devotion and duct tape. I wanted to escape the noise of city life, clear my head, and spend a week off-grid before winter rolled in. I'd chosen a campground I found in an old forum post, a free BLM site marked only by a GPS pin, with nothing around it but desert scrub and a few saguaros bending under the weight of time. The first day was perfect. Blue skies stretched so far they felt infinite, and the only sound was the slow ticking of my van's engine cooling in the heat. I set up my folding chair, cracked a beer, and let the desert stillness settle into my bones. By sundown, I was the only one there, just me, my VW, and a sky that bled orange into purple as the stars punched through. But that's when it started. I was sitting by my lantern flipping through an old trail map when I heard it. The distant hum of an engine, low, steady, and growing closer. I froze, head cocked toward the sound. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest paved road, that was unusual. The sound grew louder, unmistakable now, the chugging rhythm of an old air-cooled engine, just like mine. I glanced down the dirt road, expecting to see headlights cresting the hill. Nothing. But the sound didn't stop. It circled. Faint 1 second, close enough to vibrate in my chest the next, like someone driving slow loops around my campsite in the dark. I stood, lantern in one hand, scanning the night. The desert was empty, wide open under the moonlight. There was nowhere for a vehicle to hide. Hello? My voice cracked across the silence. No answer. I told myself it was echoes, the desert playing tricks with sound. I even laughed out loud, trying to force the tension out of my chest. But as I turned back to my van, my lantern beam swept across something that made my stomach drop. Tire tracks. Fresh ones. A narrow set, exactly like mine, curving through the dirt around my site. Tracks that hadn't been there an hour ago. I didn't sleep much that night. I locked every door, pulled the curtains tight, and lay there listening to the empty desert, every creak of the van's frame loud enough to make me flinch. By morning, the tracks had faded under a layer of wind-blown sand, but I couldn't shake the unease. By the third night, unease had become dread. I'd driven 20 miles south earlier that day to refill my water jugs and spotted no one on the way back. No campers, no rangers, no vehicles at all. Yet as dusk fell, I heard it again, the hum of an engine, faint at first, then circling. I grabbed my flashlight and stormed out, heart hammering. "All right," I shouted into the night. "Enough screwing around." No one answered. Then I saw it. A pair of headlights blinked on, 50 yards away, low to the ground like an old van. They glowed pale yellow through the dust, steady but too dim to be modern. My breath caught. I stepped forward, raising my light. "Hey, are you lost?" The headlights clicked off. The engine stopped. Silence swallowed everything. I wanted to tell myself I'd imagined it, but then from the darkness I heard something far worse. A voice. Close. Too close. "You keep a clean van," it said. The words froze me where I stood. I spun in circles, beam cutting through empty air. "Who's there?" No reply. My skin crawled as I backed into my VW, slammed the sliding door shut, and locked it. I sat there shaking, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, while outside, faint footsteps circled in the dirt. They stopped by the driver's side window, and that's when I saw him. Just a face, lit faintly by my lantern on the dash. A man in his 40s maybe, thin, hair slicked back, grinning through the glass with teeth too white against sunburned skin. "Nice ride," he said softly. "Mine's green too." I scrambled for my keys, but the ignition wouldn't turn. The engine refused to catch. When I looked back up, he was gone. The next morning, I found something lodged under my wiper blade. A Polaroid photo. It was my van. Taken in the middle of the night, curtains drawn, lantern glowing faintly inside. In the bottom corner, scrawled in shaky ink, were 2 words, "Move over." I stared at that photo until the edges dug into my fingers. The sun was climbing higher, but I still felt cold, hollow in a way that no desert warmth could burn away. I scanned every direction. Flat scrublands stretching endlessly to the horizon. There was no sign of footprints, no sign of tire tracks. Nothing to prove anyone had stood outside my van hours earlier, staring in through the glass. I told myself I'd leave. I even packed half my gear, but each time I reached for the ignition, my hands shook so badly I fumbled the keys. What if I got stranded out here? What if it was waiting farther down the road? Rationality clawed against fear. You've been camping alone for years, you've dealt with worse, but I couldn't silence the truth buried in my gut. This wasn't normal. That night, I parked my van facing the road, ready to peel out the second anything stirred. I left the curtains cracked just enough to see out, flashlight in one hand, wrench in the other. I told myself it was a test, that nothing would happen if I stayed awake, vigilant. Around midnight, the temperature dropped hard, sharp enough to fog my breath. My old VW heater clicked and groaned but stayed cold, and that's when I noticed it. Frost creeping along the windshield, though it wasn't nearly cold enough for frost in the desert. Then came the sound. Not an engine this time, a knock. Slow, rhythmic. Knuckles tapping metal, moving from the rear of the van toward the passenger side. Tap, tap, tap. I clutched my flashlight tighter. My breath hitched. "Whoever you are," I shouted, voice cracking, "I'll call the police." Silence. I swung the beam toward the sound and froze. The passenger window was fogged over completely from the outside. Someone or something had breathed on it. And then before my eyes, letters began appearing in the fog, one at a time. M-O Vive. My body locked up. The wrench slipped from my grip and clanged to the floor. A shadow shifted just outside the glass, faint but distinct. The outline of a man leaning close, head cocked unnaturally to one side. I lunged for my keys, jammed them into the ignition, and twisted. The engine roared like it hadn't struggled once, and I slammed into gear, peeling out of the campsite in a spray of dirt. I didn't look back. Not once. I drove until dawn, painted the horizon pale pink, until I reached a gas station outside Ajo, Arizona. The attendant looked up from his paper as I stumbled inside. "Rough night?" he asked casually. I dropped the Polaroid onto the counter. "You ever heard of this?" His face changed instantly, color draining until he looked nearly as pale as the picture. He glanced around like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Where'd you see him?" "Who?" I demanded. He leaned closer, voice dropping low. "Mr. Volkswagen." I swallowed hard. "It's just a story, right? Some campfire crap?" He didn't answer. He just shook his head, lips pressed tight, and pointed to a corkboard behind him cluttered with faded, missing posters. At least a dozen faces stared back. Men, women, all solo campers. Every single one had vanished from campgrounds within a 100-mile radius. I backed away, heart pounding so hard I could barely hear him when he said, "They say he only shows up to folks who camp alone in old VWs. Likes the quiet ones, the ones nobody would come looking for." I wanted to call him a liar, but then he pointed to one poster at the bottom, its edges curling, paper yellowed. It was dated 1987, and it showed the same slick-haired, grinning man I'd seen in my window. I didn't camp alone again for months. Even when I did, it was in crowded RV parks under bright sodium lights, surrounded by the hum of generators and laughter from neighboring campers. But no matter how far I drove, no matter how much noise and safety I surrounded myself with, I could still hear it in my head. That engine. That low, looping chug, circling closer, closer. I started digging. Forums, archived newspapers, anything I could find. The earliest mention I uncovered dated back to the late 70s. A man named Victor Lang, obsessed with Volkswagens, vanished after buying a mint green Type 2 bus. Witnesses claimed he'd been talking about driving where no roads went the night before he disappeared. His van was never recovered. Over the decades, people began spotting him, always near remote sites, always driving what looked like his old VW. Some said he was looking for passengers. Others claimed he wanted to trade places, that if you saw him smile through the glass, he was already halfway inside your head, pulling you toward the wheel. And the ones who claimed they saw him more than once, they all eventually went missing. 2 weeks ago, I made the mistake of going back to the desert. I told myself it was for closure. I told myself I'd camp just one night, take a few photos, and prove to myself that Mr. Volkswagen wasn't real. But as I sit here, lantern flickering in my van and this old Polaroid laid on my dash, I can hear it again, that hum, low, steady, closer.